From a young age, I gained practical knowledge of business and accounting. After high school, I wanted to take over their business completely, but they insisted I pursue higher education first. They used their savings to pay for my college, acknowledging they were getting too old and frail to manage the demanding food truck work. I wanted to care for them, just as they had cared for me, but they assured me they could manage for a few more years, and that my education was paramount. I majored in business and accounting, as my ultimate goal was entrepreneurship. My graduation day was the happiest of my life. John and Mary were ecstatic. They had even extended an invitation to my biological parents for the ceremony, but they declined to attend. After college, my plan was to take over the food truck and let Mary and John enjoy a well-deserved retirement, but they had different intentions. They had saved a substantial amount of money, which they presented to me. I was stunned. They explained they didn't want to tie me to their small business and gave me the funds to start my own venture. I didn't want to spend their hard-earned money recklessly, so I applied my business knowledge. I searched for a small local eatery in a prime location that was struggling with sales. I proposed a lease agreement to the owner based on profit sharing. After facing several rejections, I finally secured a suitable place. I started from scratch, renovating the establishment, redesigning the menu to appeal to millennials and Gen Z, and focusing heavily on providing exceptional customer service. Sales soared, and within a year, I had doubled my initial investment. 4 years later, I owned 3 successful cafes in the city. I moved Mary and John into a spacious apartment while finding a smaller place for myself. I had lived with them until then. I tried persuading them to give up the food truck and embrace retirement, but they insisted on continuing. It was, after all, their life's work. Leaving my biological parents' house with just a suitcase, I could never have envisioned graduating from college, let alone managing a chain of cafes. Then, last month, something unexpected happened. It was a typical workday. I was busy at the cash register in one of my cafes when I saw a familiar face. It felt like seeing a ghost. It was my biological father. I hadn't laid eyes on him in nearly 20 years. He looked pale and frail. With a broad smile, he walked up and hugged me. Customers were present, so I kept quiet and led him to the back office. Seeing his face instantly brought back all the terrible childhood memories. If my biological parents hadn't re-entered my life, I might not have been able to recount my story in such detail. My father expressed his happiness and pride in my success. I was speechless, simply standing there, stunned. He mentioned he was passing through town and had run into John, who told him about my businesses. He then added that he would bring my mother over on the weekend. I offered no response, and he soon left. After finishing work, I went to John and told him I had no desire to meet the biological parents who had rejected me solely for being a boy. John and Mary knew the hardship I had endured. My instinct was to run and hide somewhere for the weekend, but Mary urged me to find forgiveness and move on. I reluctantly agreed to meet them, but only if Mary and John were present. So, my biological parents came to John and Mary's home. I expected apologies for their past actions, but let me tell you, there wasn't an ounce of remorse. Instead, they began listing all the ways they had supposedly done me a great service. My mother declared I should be grateful they found such wonderful adoptive parents who raised me well and enabled my success. I was floored by her words. I wanted to unleash my feelings, but Mary squeezed my hand firmly, silently telling me to remain calm. I responded diplomatically. I am very happy that John and Mary became my parents. The meeting was awkward, to say the least. The following day, my biological mother called. I didn't recognize her voice. How could I? It was the first time she had called me in 20 years. She asked for money, explaining that my father had lost his steady job and had been working temporary contracts for years. Now she too was jobless because, according to her, no restaurant wanted a 50-year-old waitress. They were struggling to make ends meet. I asked how much she needed. She said $20,000 would suffice. Apparently, she had borrowed this amount from friends over the past few months, just for groceries, and now needed to repay the debt, but had no money. I ended the call, saying I would think it over and call her back. Here's the dilemma. Regardless of my deep-seated resentment, the thought of people demanding money from them makes me uneasy. Sometimes I suspect my mother is just trying to manipulate me. But what if they genuinely are in trouble? I would feel ashamed for not helping, despite everything they put me through. I have the money, but should I give it to them? So, I invite you to answer the author's question in the comments right now. And now, let's move on to the update. Update 1. Thank you for all the comments and support regarding helping my mother with the $20,000. Opinions were divided. I discussed it with Mary and John. Mary was pleased I was considering helping my biological parents, but cautioned me to be careful. John stated it was my money and my decision, though he shared my concerns about potential manipulation. After much thought, I decided to give my biological parents one final chance. I transferred the money to my mother's account. For a moment, I felt a sense of relief. I had helped my family, despite our history. But I was mistaken, or rather, my initial fears were correct. I worried they would start exploiting me, and that's exactly what happened. A week after the transfer, my mother called again. I answered with apprehension. She thanked me for the money, then said, "Your sisters want to meet you. When are you available?" For a fleeting second, it felt like my family genuinely wanted to reconnect. I know my parents treated me horribly, and I hated them for it. But I never harbored hatred towards my sisters. Maybe I acted out against them as a child, but as I grew older, I held no grudges. It wasn't their fault. Sometimes, I even wondered if my parents gave me away not out of malice, but simply due to poverty. I told my mother we could meet the upcoming Sunday and offered to drive to their place. She immediately interjected, "Why don't we meet somewhere else?" I didn't think much of it at the time and just agreed. She said she'd send the location details later. After the call, a strange feeling crept in. Why didn't she want me to come to their home? Granted, the location isn't crucial, but logically, if you're seeing your son for the first time in years, wouldn't you invite him home? They suggested a restaurant meeting. Soon after, she sent the address. It was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. I didn't register that immediately, being more preoccupied with why I wasn't invited to their house. When I arrived at the restaurant, they were already waiting. My sisters immediately hugged me, and for a moment, I felt genuinely happy to see them. After so many years, we chatted amiably until the menus arrived. Then they started ordering, deliberately selecting the priciest items. When they asked my father what he wanted, he just smirked and said, "Order the best, my son's a big shot now." It felt so petty. Had Mary or John said something similar, I would have felt proud. But coming from my biological parents, it sounded vile and exploitative. I just sat there, watching them indulge themselves at my expense. And yes, I paid the bill. Various thoughts crossed my mind, like just walking out before paying. But that felt too harsh. Right then, I vowed never to fall into their trap again. I remained cold and distant for the rest of the evening, though I doubt they even noticed. Furthermore, the invitation to their home never materialized. Instead, my older sister asked, "So, where's your wife?" Note, adjusted from the likely mistranslation in the source summary. I forced a smile and replied, "Nowhere yet," then said my goodbyes. When I got back, I told Mary about my greedy biological family. She was appalled. Being a kind and independent woman, their behavior was completely foreign to her. She advised me to stop being a fool, ignore them, and focus on my own life. and that's what I did. Over the following week, my sisters called, but I didn't answer. Then my mother called. I ignored her too. It's been 2 months now, and they've stopped calling and texting. I think they finally got the hint. I don't want them to be part of my life. Update 2. Hello everyone, thanks for the ongoing support. As mentioned in the last post, I stopped responding to calls from my sisters and biological parents after realizing they were only interested in my money. Almost 5 months passed. Yesterday, my biological mother called again. Seeing her name, I answered without hesitation. She started with meaningless questions about my life and work, sounding so fake and insincere that I couldn't stand it. I cut straight to the point. "What do you need?" My mother sighed deeply and said, "Your sisters had to drop out of college because your father couldn't afford the tuition. We were hoping you could help them go back." I was furious. She tried to calm me down, saying they were my sisters, my family, and I had an obligation to help. I was at work and didn't want to ruin my mood, so I just hung up. She called again in the evening. I ignored the calls several times, but it started getting annoying. Ignoring it wouldn't solve the issue. When the phone rang again, I finally answered. My mother immediately launched into her agenda. "Your sisters are so excited about returning to college, since we'll arrange it. Will you pay the full amount up front, or do you prefer semester installments? I think it's best if you transfer the money to me, and I'll handle the payments as needed, so you don't have to worry about it." I laughed out loud. "Whoa, hold on there, lady. I'm not planning on paying anything." She clearly hadn't expected that response. "So, you don't want to pay it all at once? Okay, installments are fine too." I reiterated, "I don't want to pay at all, not up front, not in installments. My sister's education is not my responsibility, especially after my biological parents abandoned me and never once checked on me over the years. You all only contacted me because you want my money." She practically exploded with rage, shouting, "Don't forget who gave birth to you. You exist because of us. Your father found you good guardians, and now that it's your turn to repay us, you can't just turn your back. You're obligated to care for your family, your parents, and your sisters." I had plenty I could have said, but I realized it would be pointless against the wall of their selfishness. So, I said, "Yes, I owe a lot to my parents, John and Mary. They deserve all the credit for my success." "Who are you? My name isn't in your records. You don't have a single picture of me. Frankly, I don't know you." She resorted to screaming and insults, but I calmly replied, "Wrong number, madam," and hung up. "Now call me whatever you like, selfish, cruel, heartless, but I refuse to give away my hard-earned money to people who were never my family. They abandoned me when I was 6 years old." Also, by the way, some commenters in previous updates asked why I refer to John and Mary by their names instead of Mom and Dad. Actually, I've called them Mom and Dad for a long time now. Not immediately after moving in, but after they gave me the chance to get an education, cared for me, and truly loved me. I grew deeply attached and started calling them Mom and Dad. I used their names in the text purely for narrative clarity. John and Mary are my real parents. As for my biological ones, I don't even have names for them. To me, they simply don't exist. So, that concludes this story. Before we move on to the next one, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Personally, the explanation that they were too poor and therefore devastated to have a boy instead of a girl because they supposedly couldn't get boy clothes and only had girl clothes sounds like complete nonsense. Children grow incredibly fast, and many parents give away bags of outgrown clothes for free. Plus, there are thrift stores and second-hand shops. Especially in Western countries, presumably, this should be much easier. It's logical to assume that if second-hand clothes reach other places at certain prices, they must be even cheaper at the source. Of course, the greed of resellers is always a factor, adding markups. Even checking online marketplaces today, you can often find bundles of these clothes for pennies, practically sold by weight. Or if you're lucky, even find them for free. I doubt time is the main factor here. The situation was likely similar 10 years ago. This clothing wasn't exactly scarce. Yes, wanting brand new clothes is different, but if you're willing to accept used items, what's the issue? Therefore, it's highly probable the real reason was something else entirely. Something else bothered them, but exactly what remains unclear.